Alistair Campbell, welcome to Ireland Unfiltered.
Thank you.
You came at a quiet time in the affairs of Britain and Ireland. Have you ever known a crisis like this in British life, in your lifetime?
I've known worst crises in terms of that sense of a particular period when you felt things had been going out of control. I think the fuel protest was a little bit like that around the turn of the century. I guess I've also seen crises involving individuals in a government. But I think the problem with this one over Brexit is it's like an implosion. And I mean, the last few days I've been in Spain, I've been in Scotland, I've been here, and I mean, it's like everywhere you go, people just think, what the hell is happening?
But
what is going on?
But it's not just a political crisis. It's a kind of an existential crisis for the country. It's beyond just who leads the Conservatives.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, but fundamentally, at its heart, it is about this decision that we made in the referendum, and the reasons that led to that, and how they're going to be addressed, and so all these things they're happening in every country. Some of those factors are being debated everywhere. But what's happened with us is that it just seems like our politics is kind of. I mean, I've certainly never known a shambles like it.
Yeah.
And it's hard to see with the way they are and their psychology. It's kind of hard to see how it ends well. Now I've got a very, very clear view about how it ends well. Is we don't do it.
Yeah.
And this is meant to be about parliament. The whole thing was meant to be about parliamentary sovereignty. And actually, if MPs stood up and said what they actually believed, they wouldn't be doing it. But I understand the politics of Cameron having had the referendum. You can't just sort of say, oh, well, Parliament's going to stand up and say, no, you don't. So I think there has to be a referendum. And the referendum should be on the three choices that she set out. Now, I'm not saying you have all three on the ballot paper, but it seems to me her deal is dead. And it's pretty clear, Merkel's been clear, and others in the European Union have been clear, there's no big renegotiation to be done around what is already there. So her deal's dead, Theresa May's deal dead, and I think you're ending up, if you talk about existential, the basic choice is boiling down to no deal, disaster, or it's no Brexit. And that's where I think we'll end up. I hope that's where we end up.
What do you mean when you say that politicians stood up and said what they really thought, rather than playing like politics being involved? You mean that there are more of them who believe this is a disaster than are actually saying it?
Oh, for sure. The vast bulk believe it's a disaster.
Do you think Theresa May believes it's a disaster?
I think she does deep down. I think that deep down, she knows. I mean, it's interesting, and I don't say much to her credit because I think she's been pretty woeful throughout. But I think it is to her credit that even though she does talk a lot of nonsense about this being in the national interest and the best deal, when you ask her the direct question, is this going to make people worse off or better off? She won't answer. She knows the answer. So I think that, she knows that. But, if you look back, if you track back from the referendum, so she becomes Prime Minister, okay? Now, what would you have thought would have been the first thing she should have tried to do when she became Prime Minister? Is bring the country together. 52 who voted leave, 48% who remained, tried to bring them together. What did she do? She pandered to this hard right fringe, the Rees-Moggs and these guys. She pandered to them because she was so worried that they were going to kind of, kill her because she's not really a leaver. And so she does her Lancaster House speech. She suddenly launches these red lines on the world, out of the customs union, out of the single market, out of the European Court of Justice. She didn't have to do that. She could have kept options open, which is usually a sensible thing to do in a negotiation. She triggered Article 50 without a plan, prematurely in my view. She then had this ridiculous election where strong and stable, strong and stable, strong and stable, strong and stable, every vote will strengthen my hand, every vote will strengthen my hand, every vote will strengthen my hand. And she lost the majority that Cameron had won. And at every stage, she went to the Salzburg summit completely unprepared, that no groundwork, it seemed to me, had been done on what the others were going to say and what they were going to do. So the whole way through, a kind of failure of statecraft, if you like. And I think it's one of those situations where often I think you see people where their strength becomes their weakness. And her strength, I'll give her this, right? She is resilient. She just keeps going, right? But I think sometimes the resilience just becomes a kind of willful inability to adapt when the wind is changing direction. And the wind has changed direction. And this thing about, the will of the people, I mean, of course you respect the referendum result, but the will of the people can change. And what happened in June 2016, where a referendum was won on a pack of lies, it's been negotiated on a bunch of fantasies. We can have our cake and eat it. We can square the circle. They need us more than we need them. Blah, 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 blah. Nonsense, nonsense, nonsense. And now, reality's coming home. And at that point, I think it's the duty of leaders, and all MPs are leaders in their own way, it's the duty of leaders to say what they really think. And what most of them think is this is a car crash. Now, you've got some of them want to use it to get rid of her. You've got Jeremy Corbyn sitting there thinking, well, this is my route to a general election. I don't believe it is. I don't think Labour's giving enough leadership on this. And so you're left with this campaign that I'm part of, the People's Vote. We've gone from 0 7 months ago when we started to now being, huge recognition and awareness of what we're trying to do. And it's the most popular of all the current outcomes.
You say that someone's strengths become their weaknesses, but you've been in that situation. Like, how hard is it to recognise the difference between being under siege in the normal course of events and actually being under siege because the tide has turned, if you know what I mean? And as you say, in this situation, it's slipped into a kind of a disaster zone. But presumably every day feels like you're being battered by somebody anyway.
It can do. But I think that, look, in the end, this is why I think it's so absurd that, for example, the Brexiteers, one of the many groups of people they blame for this is the civil service. The civil service have never been serious. It's nonsense. Ultimately, it's about the politicians. And part of the job of a politician, yes, of course, they've got to lead. Yes, they've got to make difficult decisions. They've got to do all that. That's the kind of, that's the job. But they also have to be able to see where they think things are going, and they've got to try to, sometimes they have to adapt. I mentioned the fuel protests, and, that's one that it's kind of seared on me, because that was where you really felt that the country was lurching out of any sort of reasonableness and control. And that was a very good case in point, where there came a point where we were saying, no, we've got economic objectives, we've got environmental objectives, we've got to raise money for public services, and the tax that's going on petrol, that's part of it. But we stuck to that. But there came a point where Gordon Brown, and we did all talking about it, and Gordon Brown announced that we'd look at it in the budget, and it just sort of calmed down. And then he did look at it in the budget, and he kind of gave a bit of tax relief. Now, that's politics. That's what you have to do sometimes. But it is hard. And I think what happens as well, when you're isolated, and she must feel incredibly isolated at the moment. She lost the two people that were closest to her, as it were, outside politics. Mind you, they have a lot to answer for in terms of the mess that we're in, because they were the ones who pushed her into the hard red lines. Nick Timothy and Fiona Hill. They've gone. I'm not sure whether the people who are with her now then are that close. Jeremy Hayward, we knew when he was Cabinet Secretary, but absolutely brilliant civil servant. He's been ill, and now he's died. The politicians, Damian Green was the one that was said to be a kind of a friend. I don't think she has many friends. I think her husband is probably the only person in there who really knows how she ticks. And people go on in politics about it should all be about the issues. Well, of course it should be all about the issues, but personalities are important. And they're very, very important in this context of trying to forge diplomatic alliances. And what damage have we done to our diplomatic alliances over the last couple of years? I think and if you don't have that ability to kind of forge those relationships and know when to pick up a phone and know when somebody's moving away from you, know how to get them back, that's part of statecraft, that's part of the job.
But there's been a bit of a surge in sympathy for recently.
That's lethal.
Is it?
That is lethal.
Yeah. You don't think it shows that it's not admiration for her resilience?
I think people do admire the resilience, and I think people do feel that she has a really strong sense of duty. I think people feel that, they'll give her that. But I think, look, once you're a leader, I can remember once Dennis Skinner saying to me, there was a period when Gordon Brown, people were starting to feel sorry for him. And I remember Dennis Skinner saying to me, he says, "Oh, once you got the sympathy, you've had it."
Right.
You know, because
Yeah.
it's Bill Clinton once, I once had this discussion with Bill Clinton, who's actually, Tony had asked me to go and see Bill Clinton to talk about myself, because I was at a period, I was a real crossroads in my life, and I was getting battered left, right and centre, and I was thinking of leaving, but anyway, we ended up talking about Tony. I can remember Clinton saying about Tony, he says, "Sometimes I get the feeling that you think you should get a blue ribbon for doing the job." He said, "The job is the blue ribbon."
Right.
You know, it's such a privilege to do the job, and so I think that once you start to say about leaders, "Oh, I think I'm beginning to feel sorry for her," I think that's a bad place to be.
I'm not sure how she could think it was a privilege to be Prime Minister at the time she became Prime Minister. Like, it's such a terrible, like, considering post-Brexit, it's been all anyone has ever talked about in Britain since.
Yeah, but like I say, that's partly because of the way that she's handling it. Look, I accept it was a very difficult thing to pick up. But look, and if I don't think it's ever not a privilege to be Prime Minister.
But do you see that way, like when you talk about the fuel protests and how Gordon Brown came out and said that was a situation where you could kind of chart a kind of political path out of it.
Yeah.
Like, this there doesn't seem to be, like you say, you think you know a way out of it, but equally you're not sure how possible that is. Like, is there a solution that doesn't result in chaos and anger? Even the people's vote, because as everyone's, if that was supported, you're going to have a very angry rump of people who voted to leave.
Yeah, I think that there's two things to say to that. The first is that we do tend to kind of, lump people in certain groups. So like we talk about the Labour vote, the Tory vote, Leavers, like they're all the same. And I just don't believe that. I really do believe that if Parliament would bring itself to back the idea that this Brexit on offer, and indeed any Brexit on offer, is so different to the false prospectus that was sold by Johnson and Farage and Rees-Mogg and the rest of them, that therefore should go back to the people. First question, how can it ever be undemocratic to ask the people what they think? Second question, we have now we're well over 2.5 years. The time now between the referendum and where we are now is already greater by over 100 days than the time that existed between Cameron's election in 2015 and Theresa May going for another one where he lost her majority. Now, she made that decision because she thought, you know what, I think the will of the people's changed. I think they're even keener on Brexit than they were. Now, she happened to be wrong, but she thought the view of the country had changed. If the view of the country has changed again, in the direction that I think it has, towards actually looking at this again, what is wrong with testing that? Given, as I say, that it's so different, her deal and any deal is so different to what was offered. And just the straightforward demographics, almost 1.5 million people have died since the referendum. 1.5 million people have come of age since the referendum. And I was at a university recently and a student stood up. I only knew that because this student told me. And she said, who counts more in this country at the moment, young people or the dead? And I thought that was a very, very good question.
Do you think if there was another referendum, the EU would be willing to give some sort of concessions to Britain more than Cameron got before?
I think so, and that's what you hear. I mean, look, once the UK had voted to leave, this is the other thing, because the whole thing had been peddled as these fantasies, they're all there, they need us more than we need them, they're going to be terrified of losing their Mercedes sales and their Prosecco sales and their Camembert sales, all this stuff that got said. And I said, I think day one, I said, listen, as we've made this decision to leave, the European Union now becomes its own vested interest, legitimately against us. And when you look at these negotiations, I'm afraid we have been completely routed. The UK has been routed. And the reason for that is because of the scale of the lies and fantasies. All these circles that cannot be squared. So I think what Theresa May has done, she's tried to square circles. And guess what? She's discovered you can't square circles. The circle is still a circle. The single market is still the single market. The European Union is still absolutely clear that it's going to do nothing to threaten that. And we, meanwhile, are left kind of scrabbling around with kind of customs union deals and kind of not, and backstops, but backstops that might be a backstop to a backstop. And when I heard them talking about a swimming pool, think of this as a swimming pool and, part of the country's in the deep end and part of the country's in the shallow end. And I thought, you lot have lost the plot. Yeah. And so all this stuff goes on, and she keeps peddling this message that the only choice is this deal or no deal. It's not true. It's not true. There is another choice. And when you say, would the European Union give more, understand as well that the debate in Europe has changed since the referendum as well. So I think they would. I think there are issues that you could get onto the agenda now because of other countries having these same problems that we've been having. So
Was there a complacency there beforehand, do you think?
Oh, God, yeah, absolutely. In Europe?
Yeah.
Yes, I think there has been. I think there has been a kind of, and it's weird for me at the moment to find myself in this kind of place where I feel this as deeply as I felt pretty much anything. And yet, if you look back on my diaries when we were in power, when Tony Blair was Prime Minister and Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, I was probably the least Euro fanatical of the lot of us. But I think it's because of fear of what it is that we're now losing. One of the reasons I was never that sort of keen was because, I'll be honest, I used to absolutely hate European summits. They were the most balls-aching events, right? And it was all these and it did feel very kind of, you could feel this sense of kind of a bit of the elite thing.
Yeah.
But I do think I think a lot of them have got the message, and so I think you could get change. And more importantly, would the European Union, if at any point Theresa May, if she survives, or her successor if she doesn't, I think at any point if a British Prime Minister said, look, we need more time to sort this out, I don't think they'd get more time if it was just because they had to solve their differences inside the Conservative Party. But if we needed more time to extend the process so that, for example, we could put it to a people's vote, then I'm sure that they would grant that.
What do you think David Cameron feels now?
God knows. I was actually at Tessa Jowell's memorial service the other day, and David Cameron was sitting a couple of rows in front of me, and I spent the whole time thinking that exact thought. I don't know. I mean, I just find that, and this isn't hindsight because I got involved in the Remain campaign later, and I every time I saw him, I said, why are we doing this? Yeah. Why did you have to do this?
And what did he say?
He felt that he couldn't not do it because he felt that the issue had to be resolved once and for all.
That didn't work out.
No, it certainly didn't work out. Now, I believe that the reason that he did it was for political reasons, to keep UKIP down there and to keep his Tory right wing quiet. Well, that's not worked out very well either. Yeah. So,
it's like feeding gremlins after midnight.
It was a catastrophic thing, and I think that. And there he is. I mean, he's apparently he's written his memoirs, and he's terrified to bring them out because it means he has to go on the telly and talk about it.
And during the campaign, when you were involved, when did you think it was in trouble?
I thought with a few days to go, I thought it was absolutely lost. I can remember there was somebody who worked for the campaign who I was working with them, doing the kind of preparation for the TV debates. And I said to her, this thing's lost. And she looked absolutely gobsmacked at me. Why? And the specific reason I felt that was because when I was going up north to watch my football team, I was meeting lots of people that didn't surprise me, they were voting Leave, but I was meeting lots of people it did surprise me. And I was hearing some of the reasons, and they had nothing to do with, I don't know how much of this was, there were a few actually. There was one weekend, I'll never forget it, where 4 or 5 of these people said it's because of Turkey. Turkey, because Turkey's joined the European Union. And of course, subsequently discovered they were getting bombarded on Facebook with all this stuff about Turkey. But I felt they were looking for emotional rather than economic reasons, and they were finding them. And the other thing that happened was lots of people who said they were going to vote didn't vote. There was a complacency right across the piece.
And one of the things that was rarely, if ever, touched upon during the campaign was Ireland.
Absolutely.
Nobody saw that as an issue.
Well, I think we did. I mean,
Nobody on the Leave side, are they dismissed?
Well, they didn't
if
want
did?
to see it as an issue. That was, I can remember, listen, I came over here, I came over to an event at IBEC, and I made a speech, and I did lots of telly and radio, and I said, you guys need to get more involved, you've got a vested interest in this, and you should be speaking out more than you are, because this is going to hurt you way more than it hurts us, or, as much. And then you remember John Major and Tony Blair came across, and okay, it led the news for about an hour, and then it was on to the next absolute complete piece of piss that Boris Johnson came out with. So it's like I think there was an effort to get it up as an issue, but Cameron wasn't interested that much. He was just banging the economic drum back for back home. And the second thing to say is that the Leave side, they decided just to put all of that stuff into the Project Fear bracket. So when we would talk about things about the threat to the peace process and fragile state and da-da-da-da, they would say Project Fear, Project Fear, Project Fear, we can sort it out. And if I heard them once say technology, oh, well, the border, technology. I mean, this is what's so... It's actually, it's absolutely disgusting that these people are still sort of parading themselves in the way that they do. That when Theresa May produces her deal, Boris Johnson's the first out the traps to say how terrible it is. David Davis on the radio saying what she should have done to negotiate it. He was in charge of the department for 2 years, for God's sake. I mean, it's incredible. And they're now treated like sort of venerated commentators.
But the border issue, that, like, you, as somebody who knew so much about the peace process, you must have been aware of how fragile that was and how key the border was going to be to anything. You didn't have to be kind of, Einstein to work that out. And to be fair, again, to the European Union, from the word go, what were the 3 issues that they said had to be resolved? First of all, the divorce bill, the reciprocal rights, and the Irish border. And that's right. And that's one of the circles that has not been squared. And even today, even now, they're saying Canada plus, Canada plus this, Canada plus that. It's like, they don't... The idea of these people, none of them. I've done debates with Nigel Farage, for example, and one of the things I always try to get in these debates is, can you please write down on a piece of paper what you think, how this would actually work? Just go and do the job that these negotiators have had to do. Just write it down on a piece of paper. And their answer is, well, we're not in government, we're not in government. So you can't have free trade and control over your borders at the same time.
No.
And that's the circle that...
That's one of the circles that can't be squared.
Yeah.
So this great free trade deal they want. And again, they keep saying crashing out on WTO rules is fine. Well, as I understand it, on the WTO, you'd have to have an infrastructure as part of their rules. So, and the other thing that I think just reduces us to a bit of a global laughingstock at the moment, I think one of the reasons why Britain down the years has been, such a respected country is because we have always had this sense that if you're inside an international organisation, you play your part in that, but you do abide by the rules. And, we're just basically saying we don't care about any of these rules. And some of these people, this is what happens when people become fanatical. There was a guy, in fact, the day that the deal was, the agreement, I'm not even going to call it a deal, it's not a deal, the day that the agreement was announced, I was meant to be having a discussion on Channel 4 News, I think it was, with some guy, some Tory. He bills himself as Leave EU's leading economist, who'd basically, done a whole load of tweets saying that the Irish border,
Lilico, is it that guy?
Lilco, yeah,
yeah.
that it doesn't matter,
Yeah.
that it's a price worth paying, and that if you get a bit of trouble, well, so what? And that's what they think.
Mm.
There's no price too great for this.
For their fantasy.
Yeah, credible.
And but do you think the DUP need to reconsider their entire approach to this, because they're not actually serving the people of Northern Ireland?
Well, they're so clearly not.
Yeah.
I mean, one, the Northern Ireland majority was not where they are.
Mm.
Two, you'd have thought their prime function ought to be to try to be getting those institutions up and running again. Instead of which, they've got themselves into the position. I don't blame them for exploiting the fallout of the election in the way that they did, but that's become their kind of sole, seems to be their sole reason for their sole modus operandi. And, they're another of the fantasy. So they're basically saying, right, they're saying to Theresa May, we want a clean Brexit. We want out, right? And you've got to do that. And we know our red lines, and we want them out. And we share, out the single market, out the we're with you on that, Theresa. But we don't want a hard border. She's entitled to say, well, how do I do that? Tell me how you think I should do that. Well, that's not our job. We're not in power. You're the Prime Minister. You've got to sort that out. It's another fantasy. So, and again, when you argue with them, they just give you this kind of, oh, you're weaponising it. Technology.
Do you think everyone in the north should be doing more? Do you think Sinn Féin should be doing more to get this Stormont going as well? Like it's
yeah, of course, yeah, I think they ought. But this issue, this is what you do have the sense that the Brexit's kind of almost eating itself, and the people who have fought hardest for it are destroying themselves. But I do think that's the added warning that should be there, that at a time the institutions are not even up and running, we're going to throw in this extra element to try to kind of, it's bound to destabilise things.
There's a line in the latest volume of your diaries where you quote someone who says logic has no place in the peace process. And I was thinking,
who said that?
Was it Paddy Tehan?
Oh, Paddy Tehan, yeah, Bertie's guy,
yeah.
yeah. I think he was joking, but he had a point.
But you throw in Brexit into it, and there's no logic at all, is there?
No, there isn't. And what I find extraordinary about Theresa May, I mean, I watched her yesterday in the press conference and the statement in the House, and she keeps going, but Michel Barnier is said to have said something which I thought was really, really, really interesting. He said, I can't remember where I read this, but he said that the thing I've noticed about Theresa May is she says no very, very strongly until she says yes. And I think we'll get that. Yeah. If you think about, we weren't going to have a snap election. How many times did we hear that? And she says it with absolute conviction.
Well, what is
until we have it, and then she gives you the reason why we should have it.
What was the line about the Eurosceptics? They won't take yes for an answer. What they used to say about them. Yeah. Has the people's vote and this campaign, has it given you a kind of a new lease of life? Has it given you? Because I know the quote from Tony Blair about you, where he said, "You're like me. If you have no driving purpose, you're in bother, or if you're not in bother, you create some." So I was wondering, where were you in your life before Brexit came along, and is this do you feel kind of re-energized by it?
Yeah, I do feel very, very motivated by it. I probably do this now more than anything else, and also the stuff to do with the New European, which is a new newspaper that's emerged out of the whole Brexit thing. And yeah, I do. I think it has. Part of me wishes I'd got more involved in the referendum campaign, but I guess like everybody, I suppose I did believe that ultimately that economic message would prevail. I do wish the Labour Party had got more, that Corbyn in particular had been more kind of out front in projecting a positive left-wing reason for staying inside the European Union. But maybe he doesn't believe that, so he can't do it. But I've since then, I think it's this thing I mentioned to you earlier, that I think when you fear you're losing something, that you feel the desire to fight for it even more strongly.
But is it a camp? Do you need a campaign? Like, were you slipping into kind of a life of contentment before? No. Because I know what you've said about contented is your least favorite word.
Yeah, I'm not into contentment. No, because I do lots of other stuff. So I've written, I think 16 books now in the last 10 years, 12 years. And when did I leave number 10? In about a decade. And I really enjoy the stuff I do on mental health. I get a lot out of that. And I keep very, very busy, but I think and I work with different leaders and governments abroad. But this is definitely, this feels like a purpose, and it feels like something that I couldn't not do. But no, I wasn't getting content. Don't worry.
No, you weren't. Because I know in the most recent volume as well, there's a passage where your therapist asks you if you could just switch off from everything. Go away and leave your phone behind and everything, and you're appalled at that idea. Has that changed in the years since?
No. He's got this guy David. I actually don't. Maybe I am content because I don't see him as often as I did.
Okay.
But as it happens, I saw him this week, and he was at me again. Yeah, we call it. What does he call it? We call it the croft.
Right.
He wants me to go to a croft for a month, with enough food for a month, with no television, with no phone. I can read and I can write. But that's about it. On my own, completely on my own.
How long do you think you'd last?
Not long. I really wouldn't. Well, maybe I would, but I don't think so. Now he says that he thinks because he's worried. He thinks I'm worried that I'd kind of, with all that time to reflect and not do anything other than reflect, that I'd finally find my demons, whatever they were. Right. And I don't think that's right. I think I just couldn't, to be honest, I couldn't stand being away from home for a month.
What do you think your demons are that you would find them? Because I presume, like the work you've done on yourself, you have some idea of what they are.
I don't really, no, I don't.
Do you not?
Not really. I know how they express themselves, but I think that, I think I say this in the book, that I sometimes say to him, I say, look, I think you think there's something terrible in my childhood that I've forgotten. I just don't think there is. It's like, so, and I've done all the kind of Freudian stuff, and I've done all the kind of dreams analysis, and I've done all the sort of stuff that you do. But my own view is that some people get depression and some people don't. Some people get addicted to substances and some people don't. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't stuff within that you could, in a kind of patient-psychiatrist relationship, unbundle, but I think I've unbundled it as best I can. Now, I could be wrong though. I mean, Fiona, my other half, she thinks she thinks there's a reluctance in me to kind of to delve even deeper, but I feel I've delved pretty deep.
But it is interesting. We had Lynn Ruane, who's an Irish politician, on last week's show, and she, stuff that happened to her in her childhood, and she reacted to it one way, and her brother didn't even give him a moment's thought. So different people, as you say, react differently to the same set of circumstances.
Sure. And there's lots of, but I find, so for example, when I'm talking to Fiona about this, is that, because I don't have that many really vivid memories of my childhood, and she'll go, all right, okay. So but I just think, there is a part of my life that I did kind of wipe out with drink though, so there was a few years of where, so I think my memory maybe got hit, but I don't know.
But you said you had a happy childhood. Was that because you can't remember it?
No, but put it this way, I don't have memories of unhappiness in my childhood. But equally, I can. There's things I can, and when I've been with David, my psychiatrist, and he'll probe away and he'll push away. And you end up sort of, I think sometimes you end up finding things and you build them up into things that maybe they weren't. So there are a few incidents in my childhood that I've talked about with him. But then after I've left, I thought, I don't know, what was I talking about? It wasn't that big a deal at the time.
Like
You know.
what now?
I was getting beaten up. And I remember I got beaten up after playing football. And after these kids who sort of hung around afterwards, and walking home and just sort of literally finding a place where I was on my own and saying to myself, right, you've got to learn to look after yourself without reference to other people.
Right.
Now, I think that was a good thing.
Yeah. What
but
age were you?
Huh?
What age were you, did you say?
Pretty young, 8,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
That's a really tough way for an 8-year-old to kind of think about the world, isn't
Yeah,
it?
but I did. So, like you, my psychiatrist was very, very interested in that. But I just felt, and it was like, it was, I can remember him saying, but did you feel your parents should have been there for you? And I, well, no, because I was playing football. Why should they have been there? So, I think that these kind of things, though, that I had another one with my brother, Donald, who's sadly now dead. I remember once when I was, he was kind of chasing me up the garden path, and I ran through the door, and I slammed the door on him, and he put his hand through the door, and he cut himself right up here, and he's had a scarf the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And so, and again, it was one of these things where I'm trying to find something to say to my psychiatrist, and then we're kind of analysing the blood going down his arm and all this sort of stuff. I said, no, I can't remember. All I know is he had a scarf the rest of his life, and
And did you get into trouble for it?
well, I did, yeah, but we both got into trouble because he'd been the one chasing me up the garden. But yeah, it was a real bad one. It was right next to
Were you
the.
driven as a kid? Were you were you as driven about what you wanted to do and what you wanted to be?
I don't know about as a child, but I think I was. Yeah, I think I was once I was into my teens. I definitely felt I was going to do something that was a bit abnormal.
Right.
I don't know why I felt that, but I did, and I felt, I wasn't a swot, but I really liked working. I really liked studying. I really liked, I was very competitive in terms of exams and stuff like that. So.
And did you fit in? Did that separate you from people, or were you
No,
popular?
not really. I mean, I fitted in. I fitted in as much as I wanted to fit in, and I think I was born in Yorkshire, and my dad had a really bad accident when I was about 10, and we had to move to Leicester. Okay, he got his job. He got moved, and that was quite a big thing. So the four kids. I was the third of 4. So my 2 older brothers and I, we all started school in Leicester in the middle of a term. We were it's so weird this, right? We're all born and bred in Yorkshire, but because of the Scottish background and because of playing the bagpipes, we were all nicknamed Jock, right? And I must have not wanted to get accepted because I had a Burnley scarf. We're in a Burnley tie now. I had a Burnley scarf. I never ever took it off in school. Yeah.
Did you get a hard time for it?
Yeah, and including from the teachers, and I had a head teacher. And then I went a step further. I had we had this black blazer, right, school uniform. I decided to have a blue anorak. I never took that off either.
Right.
And I think I was saying, I'm fine here. I like it. I don't dislike you guys, but this is not my world. And I think I've always had a bit of that. And that's actually when the Burnley thing, I'd always supported Burnley as a kid in Yorkshire, but that's when it became an obsession. When I was like weekends hitching to Burnley, going to games, it became a big thing for me. And I think it was like, I don't know. And I think this thing about identity is really important. That may be the other reason why maybe I do feel a sense of a European identity. Because I've never really felt English. I've always felt British. And I think that's still the biggest part of my identity. I feel British. I feel very Scottish. But when I go to Scotland, of course, they basically, a lot of them see me as English.
Yeah.
for obvious reasons, because I sound it and because that's where I live and that's where I've lived all my life and what have you. But I feel British, I feel Scottish, and I feel European.
Mm.
I don't really feel English. And I do feel with this Brexit thing that I think a lot of it's about English nationalism.
Yeah. And you never felt that
No,
identity.
no.
And were you close to your brothers?
Yeah. Yeah, and they're both dead now. I mean, it's like I was doing the Charles Kennedy Memorial Lecture the other night, and I made the point that my two brothers, I'm 61, they both died age 62. But I was very close to my oldest brother, particularly the one who I nearly killed when he put his hand through the glass. He was in the military. He joined the military because he loved bagpipes, basically. He joined the Scots Guards and he was a piper. But he was diagnosed with schizophrenia in his early 20s. And yeah, I was particularly close to him. My other brother, Graham, he was a bit of a loner. And I mean, I was close to him in that, you know, and he and I actually, you know, we shared a room for the entirety of my teenage years. But he never really found what his, you know, back to the thing about what his purpose in life was. He was a bit of a drifter.
And when did he die?
He died this year.
This year. And your other brother died in 2016.
Yeah.
That's tough to take both of that on.
Yeah, it was my mother not long before that, and no, we've had a lot of my sister in particular. Actually, there's just me and her left now. But my sister, she looked after both my brothers latterly, and also she lives just up the road from both my parents, so she's had a hell of a lot to go through. But yeah, it's been that's been tough, and I think that, you know, to be honest, the real reason I've always had this passion for campaigning on mental health. I mean, I talk about my own issues, and that's in a sense what I guess has made me a bit of a voice in this area. But the real reason I've always been passionate about campaigning on this is because of Donald and what I've seen with him.
And how old were you when he was diagnosed first?
I was in my late teens, I was just leaving school.
And then was it a big shock to the family?
Yeah, it was huge. It was huge, and interestingly, even though my dad was a vet and therefore from a kind of quasi-medical background, we knew absolutely nothing about it. And here's the other thing about just how the world has changed, because when Donald was diagnosed, we just got a phone call that he'd been taken to hospital, to a military hospital down in Southampton, and a place called Netley. It's no longer there, but so I went down with my dad, and my dad had to get back to work, right? It's just the way it was. So I stayed down there, and you know, I didn't have a driving license, but I don't know if my parents ever knew this, right? But I either got a train or I hitchhiked back to Leicester, and I got Donald gave me his car keys. He had a little runabout car, and I drove the car back down. And I was living in. I mean, I think about this now with my kids, right? You know, you'd be finding them at the hotel, and you'd be, you know, but the world wasn't like that then. And so I stayed there for a while. And actually, I think that's when my absolute fascination with mental illness really became, because I was going in every day to the hospital.
Right.
And as Donald, you know, he got diagnosed, and then he had lots of ECT and, you know, electroconvulsive therapy, and then he was sitting around all day with all these other soldiers who were, you know, invalidated out, and it was fascinating. But yeah, it had a very, very, very profound effect on me, for sure.
And how did that illness, how did it chart itself over the years then?
I mean, at the start, one of the most, you know, I think one of the most kind of, you know, you have a few moments in your life where you just think, oh my God, my life is changing here. One of them was when my dad and I walked into the room where Donald was in the hospital, and he was a different person. He was terrified, he was paranoid, his eyes looked different. He'd been drawing all this kind of crazy stuff on the walls, and as I say, we didn't really know much about it. But then, when he made, one of the reasons I was so proud of him is that he actually, given that he had that illness and he had it for the rest of his life, he didn't allow it to kind of destroy him or to define him. So I can't remember how long he was in hospital, but he had a few jobs. Eventually, he got a job at Glasgow University he worked in the security department, but he was also the university piper because he was a very good bagpipe player. And he held that job for 27, 28 years. And one of the great things about the university as an employer, they understood he had the condition. Most of the time, he was okay. A lot of people, when he died, they had no idea he had schizophrenia.
Yeah.
It was when he got. But what happened? A lot of people who have serious mental illness, this happens, is they start to feel better, and then they think, "Oh, I can do that." The medication, the side effects are so horrible that they try and wean themselves off, and then it just goes haywire again. So we had quite a lot of crisis periods where he'd end up in hospital, but he had an okay life considering.
But must have been quite terrifying. You say you knew your life was changed, but that first time you went in, it must have been quite terrifying to see your brother transformed.
Yeah,
like
it was, and actually, my mum, when I remember, she said many times that her life never changed back from the moment she got that phone call. That for the rest of her life, that was just a part of everything she thought about all the time. Because, like I say, I don't want to overstate it, because there are people who have schizophrenia who can't get a job, who can't drive a car, who don't have relationships. Donald, he had a marriage. I mean, it didn't last, but he had a marriage. He had an incredible circle of friends. He was a great musician, as I say. He had a lot going for him, and people loved him. I mean, his funeral, it was like a real kind of outpouring. But he used to call it this shitty illness. It's a horrible illness. And my daughter, she's 24 now, and she makes films, and she talked to Donald a lot about it. She was fascinated by him and by his illness and how he lived with it. And she filmed this. I was watching some of it the other day, where he was describing what it's like when you're actually ill. And he was saying that, for example, like, you can be sitting there and you see a wall plug over there, and there'll be snakes coming out of it at you. And so you look away, and there'll be somebody over there who's telling you to do something, and inside you shouldn't, but that voice is feeling really, really strong and really, really powerful. And it's just, it's horrible. And you get used to living with it as the person close to him. But I can remember sometimes, you'd be in pubs. Maybe we'd be sitting just like you and I now, having a chat in a pub. And suddenly he'll just say something to somebody because he thinks that person's talking to him. And, you've just got to be so careful, because suddenly people can switch.
And when you watched that film the other day, like, how do you feel looking back at that now? Do you miss him a lot?
Oh yeah, I miss them both, but I particularly miss Donald, because I think it was like, I do, and I think it's there's not a day that I don't. It's interesting. I sort of clock every day the first time that I think of him. And it's, I feel a little bit guilty if it's in the afternoon.
Right, yeah.
But yeah. And then, of course, the other thing, this is the great thing about music. We've got his music. He made records. And so that's important as well. And it's interesting, the thing about the bagpipes. I mean, I've actually, since my dad played the bagpipes as well, and since they both died, I play a lot more than I did.
Yeah.
And that's a sort of point of connection as well.
And does death scare you?
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so. Does it scare me? No, I don't think so.
Does it ever scare you? Do you dwell on it? Do you?
Well, I dwell on it. The time I've dwelled on it is when I've been suicidal. And I have had periods when I've been suicidal. And No, I don't, funny enough, I don't think about the death. Although that being said, I mean, my first novel, there's a suicide in it, and Back to My Shrink. And actually, it's a psychiatrist.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Yeah, well, that is significant.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about that, and he was moving from, are you trying to kill me or are you trying to kill yourself here?
Yeah.
And funny enough, when I wrote the scene where the guy jumps in front of a lorry, it was me.
Right.
Yeah, it was me.
And are those? Do you still get those moments, those suicidal moments?
Yeah, I do. I mean, when was the last time? When I get insomniac, which I do sometimes, I don't know if this is suicidal thoughts, but I lie there imagining the aftermath of my death. Who's at the funeral? What are they saying? How's Fiona feeling? How are the kids feeling? And I don't. But before, when I was at times when I've actually thought I just want to end all this. You definitely persuade yourself that it's the right thing to do for other people.
Because there's a line in where you talk about, in one of your diaries, you talk about looking at Fiona and she looked totally at peace and calm. And I was telling myself it was because when she slept, I was out of her life. Like that does, to me, speak to somebody who has some kind of a bit of, heavy degree of self-loathing at times. And, when you put, how you feel about those thoughts sometimes, again, you think it's for the better, for everyone else's
for sure.
benefit.
No, I've definitely had that thought at times. Yeah, definitely. And I think that's why it really annoys me when people do take their own life, and you hear people saying, how selfish are they? Don't they think about their kids and do they? Well, of course they do.
Yeah.
Of course they do, and that's how bad it gets for some people. That even that can't stop them. Now, I think with me, I don't think I will ever take my life. I've never actively done anything to bring that about, but I've had the thought. I've had the thought in quite a profound way, and you definitely have done that. I can remember that feeling, and that's not the only time. It might be the only time I put it in the diaries, but where, I'm thinking, there's Fiona, she's asleep, she's calm, she's having a nice, and it's because I'm not in her head.
Yeah.
Whereas other times I can tell that when I'm really badly depressed, I can tell that I'm having a terrible effect on her and on the kids, and it's horrible.
And
so you think, well, why not take yourself out of it?
Yeah, and it passes. Now that it's going to pass, do you? Or?
In the main, I mean, I've definitely got myself to a better place in terms of how I deal with it. Whether it's through sport, keeping fit, having better obsessions.
Right.
But
not curing yourself of the obsessive impulse.
No, I don't think so. I don't think that'll ever go. And like you talk about the People's Vote thing, it's like, I was very proud the other day, somebody said on Twitter, when Alistair Campbell farts, do you think it comes out as People's Vote? I thought, yes, result. The message is getting out. When your farts become part of your campaign, that is... But no, so I think I've still got that. But no, I do feel in much better shape. And it's interesting, the thing about the sort of key relationships in your life. I mean, if you've read the diaries, you'll know that there's been times when Fiona and I, it's been really kind of... but I'd say we're better with each other now than we've ever been, including right back at the start. It's like... now, I think that's partly because we're both strong personalities and we've come through something together. But I wouldn't... I'd be very, very surprised if I get to the end of my life without having more really dark periods. I think they're just part of what goes on in here. And
drinking and you've said that 13 years you weren't drinking was one of the things you were most proud of. But then you started again. Why was that?
Oh, God knows.
But why do you say it like that? You say it as if you've.
Because I was really proud of that, and I used to count the days.
Yeah.
And it's funny watching Theresa May the other day compare herself to Jeff Boycott.
Yeah.
Because I used to do this thing where every night when I went to bed, I'd pretend it was a run. Because Jeff Boycott was one of my heroes when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Right? I've met him since.
He's not so much of a hero.
He was a hero when I was a kid. But he did have this kind of amazing sort of, and so I'd go to bed and I'd do this thing in my head. I'd go, and there's Alistair Campbell, he's climbing into bed, and that's another run, he's now up to 3,614, he's not out. And so when I broke the spell, as it were, and to this day I don't know why I did it, it was just it was an impulse. And I think what it was, I wanted to test myself. I wanted to see whether I could just have a drink. Now, if there's anybody from AA out there, I'm not recommending this at all, but I'm just absolutely open. That's what happened.
But why did you want to test yourself?
Don't know.
Like you're testing yourself and all. You're pretty busy. You were testing yourself and all
to see
sorts of
whether I
ways.
failed.
Yeah.
And what's really strange is I didn't like it very much. And now I can sit down with Fiona and we can sit down, have dinner, and I can have a glass of wine and I can take it or leave it.
Really? Are you thinking about it at all when you're having it? Or you think I'm only going to have one?
Yeah, maybe. I'm also thinking on the occasions when I've maybe had more than one, I've not felt the desire.
Right.
And I think with what I've decided about this, and again, my psychiatrist and I disagree about this. He thinks I should just never touch it.
Yeah.
And he's probably right, but what I think is that I've got an addictive personality and I've gone through different addictions at different points in my life. I don't think I could drink a lot today.
And why does he think you shouldn't touch it?
Because he thinks that it's fine now, but he says if something terrible happened, like, something happened to one of the kids or to Fiona, that he could easily see me sort of spiralling. That's what he says.
And you said you never wanted to go to AA. Why was that?
No, it's never that. Not that I didn't want to. It's just that I never did.
Why didn't you? You never considered it.
Um,
Was it the God thing?
No, because my son's in it. He goes to AA, and and I do feel I've got a kind of spiritual side to me, but I've never done. I just can't do God.
Yeah. But you describe having these near God moments.
I do have near God moments. Yeah, I do.
And Blair
I
used
do.
to think you were going to become an Islamic fundamentalist, did he?
He didn't think I was going to become an Islamic fundamentalist. He said he was worried that if I found faith, it would
go straight to the
it would be of
extreme.
a very extreme kind. I said, well, you could talk converting to Catholicism, but no, I don't know what the I think what it was when.
Because if you say that thing about the boycott and the runs and
Yeah.
counting it up each night, and if you
Yeah.
talk to people who are in AA,
Yeah.
that day-to-day obsession with a drink leaves them a lot of the time.
Yeah, I know. But I think with me, I got myself, once I came out of hospital in 1986, and then I had quite a lot of time off work, then I went back to work. And I think I had a real moment of saying, right, you've been given a chance here to sort yourself out. Take it. And I think there was a part of me, maybe it's back to the 8-year-old on the,
Yeah, yeah,
where there was a part of me that said, I'm going to do this on my own.
yeah.
Now, the truth is, I didn't do it on my own because I had Fiona who stood by me. I had a great GP that I had a great relationship with the GP. I could phone him up whenever I wanted. I had a great boss who took me back. So I had other people around me. Most of my colleagues at the Mirror, I was in a very heavy drinking environment in the old Fleet Street. But most of my colleagues at the Mirror were absolutely brilliant. They weren't trying to get you to the pub. They weren't sort of, taking the mickey or any of that stuff. It was so I wasn't doing it on my own, but I felt a sense of ownership of it. And I think the AA thing is amazing. I think the whole concept is brilliant. I mean, Bill and Bob, who started it, I think they're two of the legends of history. Because it's not just Alcoholics Anonymous now. You've got narcotics and gamblers and all these other the concept is fantastic, and I love it. But I got through that period without it. I just didn't feel the need.
And then maybe your addictions, as you say, your addictive personality, and you found other things to latch onto. And once you started working for
work for sure, exercise definitely,
and
even my football team is an addiction, really.
Yeah. Is there anything you do moderately? Would you say?
Do moderate? Yeah, I play the bagpipes moderately.
I mean, in moderation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't play every day. What do I do in moderation? Not much.
No. And you said about yourself and Roy Keane that you were both a bit dry drunkish. Talking to people who didn't understand that expression, what would you say that means?
I think it means that it's the thing about the obsessive personality. You're on it the whole time.
And was your temper or your anger a way of releasing those frustrations and those obsessive ideas and thoughts as well, do you think? Do you think you fed off your temper a bit?
What temper?
You had no temper?
What temper are you talking about?
This is like Roy Keane. If you talk to Roy Keane, he'll tell you he never lost his temper. He doesn't know what people are talking about.
Is that what he says?
Yeah.
Yeah, he had a little go at me at Burnley recently, but...
Anyway.
Did he? Yeah.
About what?
No, I'm not telling you.
Oh, go on.
No.
I think it was to do with Oxford.
I'll tell you exactly what it was. It was because he saw that I talked about a previous conversation on the television. And he says, is this one going to appear on television? So there you go, Roy. He says, there's nothing to stay private. Anyway.
Right.
But it was, I do like him though. I think he's a great bloke.
Yeah.
I do. I've got, I think, real admiration for him. What a player as well.
He was a great player.
Yeah.
He was a great player. But did you find your temper was something that you kind of almost got a release from as well? It would build and build, and then you'd explode.
Maybe. I don't lose my temper that often.
No, but did you? Did you when you were working? When you were?
I'm sure I did that often. I know the kind of caricature was that I was ranting and raving and bawling and shouting. I wasn't.
Yeah.
I think I was pretty calm most of the time, and I was very. I think I am a bit of a control freak, and I wanted to feel that I had control of what was happening. But this idea, honestly, you hear from these journalists who, he was never off the phone shouting and raving. I mean.
But you see, I think but I think the thing about that is if people who lose their temper give themselves credit for the 97 times out of 100 they don't lose their temper. But to the other people, it's the 3 times out of 100 they do that matter. And that's maybe where the perspective is different if you're on which end of the temper you're on, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but I don't call it temper. I don't think you lose. When I'm having a sort of, toe-to-toe argument with somebody about something, a journalist that I'm calling out for something, right? I don't see that as losing my temper. I'm having an argument.
Right. Yeah.
So losing my temper, I did lose my temper sometimes. Yeah. I did go over the top sometimes, but not very often. I don't think not fewer than 3%.
Well, that's good. That's good for the people who know they're a select bunch. Were you asked to ghost Keane's autobiography?
Not quite. What happened was that, if I'm allowed to talk about this, Roy, that his agent, I'd spoken to his agent about something, and he said they were talking about the autobiography, and they'd been discussing whether I might be somebody to do it. That was it.
Was that the one he did with Eamon Dunphy?
I'm not sure. I can't remember. Is it on 2?
He did one. Yeah, he did one a couple of years ago.
Right. Yeah, I think it was the first one.
Ferguson and Keane. Do you think they'll reconcile?
No idea.
No idea.
You have to ask them.
You're blocking up on this. You're frightened about what Roy said to you in Burnley. You've talked about everything.
I'm not talking about this. I'm not talking about you and Fergie.
You've talked about everything.
I'm not talking about you and Fergie, okay? Roy, promise.
This is the only thing he's... But I wonder then about, you've said as well about happiness and it being something that you can only judge at the end of your life. Is that something you would...
That's a dark view, isn't it?
Well, I don't know if it's a dark view. I wonder if it's something you still feel.
I think I do. I think I do feel that, yeah. I think that... But what I think is that... I mean, I wrote... That was a book I wrote called The Happy Depressive. And that I feel... I'm a happy person, right, most of the time. Most of the time, I can have a laugh with you. I'm motivated, but I get depression. And when I'm depressed, I can't have a laugh with you, and I don't get motivated, and there's times when I just don't want to face the world, right?
Yeah.
But they're the kind of bad periods in an otherwise good life. I have a great life, I've got a great family, I've got great opportunities, I do interesting things. But I do think that we spend too much time as individuals and also as a kind of culture thinking that life's all about, being joyful in the moment. And I don't think it is. I think life's a real struggle for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think life's at its best when it's a bit of a struggle and you're fighting for something and you're trying to improve things, and whether it's for yourself or for your country, whatever it might be. And I think that, and I think the way that we, when you look at a lot of the stuff that's on the telly and the assumptions that we're making that people are just striving to be happy. Well, no, they're striving for all sorts of things. And I think maybe this is a way of an atheist kind of trying to make sense of, life and death. That there is, I don't see it as a kind of a godly reckoning, but you do your own reckoning. And I think one way of staying, reasonably on the straight and narrow is you think that when I get to the end of my life, I want to be able to look back and think that I lived a good life. And I think that's, I'm not saying I'm motivated by that, but it gives me a framework to think of.
And you think the satisfaction on a day-to-day basis then comes from the things you do as much as anything, and what you can achieve?
Yeah, and I think that, so for example, I can enjoy, I can be, you see some people that, but back to the drink thing really, I think people often equate happiness with having a good time. I don't equate happiness with having a good time at all. I think a lot of the people who are having a good time are having that good time because they're not happy at all.
Yeah.
And they feel this need to get completely smashed.
I often think people who say that all they want is to be happy are among life's most unhappy people. There's if you keep thinking this idea, all I want is happiness, you might as well say all I want is to live on the moon. Like, it's not a...
Or all I want is Brexit. Imagine that. Imagine if you...
But Brexit was a psychological impulse, wasn't it? It was taking back control.
You see, the thing about contentment as well, that comes from my mum.
Right.
Because my mum always used to say to me, why can't you just be content? Now, my mum was content. She was one of the happiest people anybody ever met, right? It didn't mean she didn't have ups and downs in her lives, but she was very, very happy and she was really content. She really was. But it's not for me. I think life's just, I think you need to struggle and fight for things.
But when your friend Philip Gold was ill, he talked about how he learned to enjoy things more. Like, there's a line, I think, in the diaries where he says, he's just enjoying the simple things now.
Yeah.
And is that something that you, like, something extreme like that needs to happen for people to appreciate the simpler things? Possibly.
And it was amazing to see Philip when he was dying, because he was saying things like, you suddenly you hear a bird sing and it's just the most amazing sound, and you notice that the colour on a leaf changed overnight or whatever it might be. And he definitely sort of had that sense of stuff happening around him. I mean, I did say to us, look, you're finding God here as an insurance policy, aren't you? And but he did. He went and got, he rediscovered the whole kind of quite high church towards the end of it. And I don't know that. I mean, lots of people think that's going to happen to me.
Right.
My sister does, because she does God.
Okay.
Tony does.
Yeah.
Tony Blair. Catherine MacLeod, friend of mine, she's absolutely convinced God's coming.
And why do they all think this?
I don't know.
No, you must have some idea.
I don't. I think it's because I'm interested in it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I describe myself as a pro-faith atheist. I'm not anti-faith at all. I'm anti-faith when people use it to kind of go around, butchering each other, and I'm anti-faith if it's used to sort of giving them their own sense of kind of moral superiority. But I love the fact that my sister's such a believer, and that gives her such a sort of strength and comfort and all
And
the
would
rest
you
of it.
would you like the consolations of it? When you talk about those near God experiences, is that what it is almost? It's kind of seeing the consolations in the, because I think that one in the book is when you've just come over a hill in Scotland and you're looking at the scenery and
That's in a that went into a novel as well.
did it?
Yeah. I don't see them as consolations.
No.
No. There's part of me that gets frustrated. I say, God, it must be amazing to think this is God.
Mm.
I think that must be amazing. So it's partly sort of, you know, sort of, I wish I could feel something like that.
Yeah.
So maybe it's like, is this what they feel when they get God?
Mm.
But I don't. But it's I do have moments like that, yeah.
Just want to ask you about the media now globally because of Brexit, because of Trump. Like, do you think there needs to be a shift in how the media covers stories? You know, the old kind of balanced model is outdated when people, you know, when Trump gets the Republican nomination essentially because he's the guy among 12 people shouting the loudest and saying the biggest lies. And do you think there has to be a kind of a more interventionist way with the media?
But it depends, I mean, what is the media? It's like, you know, the media is people saying things on social media. I mean, can you even say, like, how long has Joe been going?
8 years.
Right, it's nothing. I think we talk about the media and we still sort of mean BBC, RTE, Daily Telegraph, Irish Times, Daily Mirror. I think it's just changed. I mean, if you think now that Facebook is probably the biggest media entity in the world,
Yeah.
and they don't produce anything. So when we say the media needs to change, well, how do they
But
apply to that?
that approach that, you know, that we are just going to put two sides of every story that kind of
But
holds.
I don't think people have really done that for a long time.
Do you know?
No, I don't.
Because you described yourself as a biased journalist when you were working.
I was biased. Yeah, for sure.
So people just be more upfront about where they're coming from.
I mean, I think it's good that we have journalists and media organisations like the BBC say that say they want to give a balanced debate. My problem with the BBC is that on Brexit they haven't. Now I know they get it from both sides, but I think that sense of equivalence, you know, where you give exactly the same weight in a news bulletin to 5,000 Nobel Prize winners and Patrick Minford, who's the one economist that they roll out on the Leave side, or that you have every scientist in the world telling you that man-made climate change is real, and here's 10 minutes with Nigel Lawson to talk absolute cock, but we don't challenge him. That's not balance. It's not even journalism. Fun enough, on my way here today, I just in the hotel and I caught a bit of Sky News and there was a Tory MP on coming with absolute drivel about, you know, Brexit, and we could do this and we could do this and it'd be very easy to do this and we could have an election and get a new leader and we could renegotiate and Canada plus plus and Brexit's going to be marvellous, blah, blah, blah. And then they went to a guy, Sky's guy in Brussels, and he just sort of very calmly said, without saying it was nonsense, just very calmly said, why, well, that's very difficult for that to happen, it's very difficult for that to happen, and that's not going to happen.
Right.
And I think it's that we need to do more of. It's like, I just feel that, but I mean, I don't think, you know, when you say, should the media, it's too big. What is it?
Yeah.
It's like saying, you know, do you think that government should be better at what they do? Well, yeah, I do. Do I think the media should cover things better? Yeah, I do. But how you actually make that happen, I don't know.
Are you scared about Brexit? Scared about what's going to happen?
Scared as in?
As in that this seems to be a point in British life especially, but it affects Ireland, affects everywhere, where things seem to be particularly out of control.
I don't know if I'm scared. I mean, I'm at the moment more confident than I was that we can get to the right place. Am I scared or fearful of some of the things that might happen en route? Probably. I don't think there's going to be an easy way to anything on this. But I'm more confident than I was that we can get to the right place. And for me, the right place is giving the country the chance to think again. And the country deciding, do you know what, we've had a little look over the precipice, we don't like the look of it, we're going to pull back. I think if we do that, yes, you'll have a lot of people who are unhappy. Yes, you'll have the Farages and the Rees-Moggs going on, but they're going to do that anyway. I think you'd find that actually the country would go, oh, do you know what? Thank God for that. I really do.
Yeah, because they're not as obsessed about it as everyone else. They want it to come to an end.
Yeah, but do they want it to come to an end in a pretty chaotic, catastrophic way, which I think no deal would be? I think the trouble with May's deal is it's a miserable decline, and I do think in history, that sometimes countries choose their own decline. Mention my mum again. When she died, we were clearing out the house, and I found all my old school reports in this little folder that she kept them all. And there was one when I was about 13 or 14, history. Alistair's essay on the decline of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was a very good piece of work.
Right.
There you go. And I thought, I wonder if future generations will be, the essay question will be, to what extent did the referendum of 2016 signal the decline of the UK?
And to what extent did Alistair Campbell halt the decline?
That'd be a good one. That'd be a good one, wouldn't it? My daughter, actually, when she did her A-level, was doing politics, she got a question about me in an exam and she didn't know the answer. It's true. It was, what purpose did the Order in Council covering Jonathan Powell and Alistair Campbell serve? I thought, God, that is how has-been we are. We are now exam questions. I think it was 2 marks as well.
Right, that's not good.
Not much.
Not much. Anyway, Alistair Campbell, thank you very much.
Thank you.